Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities Podcast, the podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199, a comms agency working in sustainability, and with me
is Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates, and we work with forestry's commodities.
We've got a really interesting episode today, certainly interesting to us with our background in palm. We're going to be doing some serious myth busting around palm oil, and to help us do that, we have Emily Meijaard from Borneo Futures, which is a scientific consultancy based in Brunei. Emily's the lead author on a new report, Does Palm Oil Really Rule the Supermarket? Now, before you introduce Emily, Judith, I'm going to ask you a question. And I know what your answer is going to be, and I think it'd be the same for anyone who's in the space. What percentage of supermarket products contain palm oil?
50%.
50%, of course it is. We all know the answer to that. We've been repeating it for the last 15 years. But today, we're going to examine that claim.
So, Emily, welcome. I'm really interested in this report, but before we get into it, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the organisation that you work for?
Hi, thank you for having me. So I work for Borneo Futures. I am a scientific writer and a sustainability researcher. I have a bit of a background in planetary health as well as conservation science. And Borneo Futures is a scientific consultancy, and we look into sort of novel tools and novel approaches to addressing conservation issues and sustainability issues. So we do a lot with conservation science in Borneo and in Southeast Asia in general, but we also have a whole additional element where we are looking at food systems, particularly vegetable oils. And prior to doing this study, I worked on an IUCN report on vegetable oils and kind of the nuances behind different oils and how they're produced and how we need to consider a whole range of factors, not just the environmental impacts, but also the ethical impacts and this sort of thing. And within that, we looked at perceptions around certain oils, and it's very apparent that palm oil kind of stands out as, I guess, the bad guy amongst the oils. And this is where we kind of decided to do this study, because you hear so much about palm oil in the media. And I mean, talking to people I know, friends that I have about palm oil, everyone always says, oh, I would never consume palm oil. It's really bad. I would only buy things that say no palm oil on the label. And we kind of link this back to the claim that we see everywhere and is even used in sort of sustainable palm oil narratives, that it is in 50% of products. And looking at the statistic and how old it was, we thought it'd be quite interesting just to look at where it came from and whether it still holds true.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think I know where it came from, but where do you think it came from?
Well, we see when you look online, it says that it comes from the WWF, and whenever people cite it, they say as stated by the WWF, but we weren't ever able to find an original piece of research on this figure. So we didn't know, and some claims said it was all supermarket products, some said it was of packaged products. So it was all quite vague, and we couldn't really find a methodology behind it. And from our research, we could see it really did make a difference whether you're looking at everything in the supermarket. So if that includes fruits and vegetables, or just packaged products, or just processed products. So apart from it being quite an old claim, there was also some uncertainty as to how the statistic was generated in the first place.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that would be certainly my sort of thought process, that it came from WWF. And the only bit that I would add to that, because totally agree, it just suddenly seemed to appear. Everybody keeps quoting it. I've never seen a report of how that came about. And the only thing I can think of was that it was right at the very, very beginning, before there were even just as the RSPO was born, almost, that palm oil is in 50% of products because, it coats raisins, it's in butter, it's in spreads, it's in, well, not butter, you know what I mean? It's in spreads, but bakery, pastry, cakes, etc. So yeah, definitely. Um, and everyone keeps repeating it, but no one knows where it's come from.
I mean, yeah, I must have repeated that hundreds of times in my comms over the years. So I've definitely been guilty of perpetuating this sort of foundational myth for the prevalence of palm oil. Do you have any idea how prevalent it is, Emily?
That wasn't part of our study. We didn't really want to go into perceptions. That would be taking a different route, but it would be something very interesting to look at how prevalent it is online. But if you just look up palm oil, WWF, 50%, we did a few Google searches like this, and everything that comes up refers to that. And it is used so widely, and it's used for positive things and also in a negative way. It can say like, oh, you should never buy palm oil. It's in everything. But then equally, people are using it to say, look, palm oil's in everything. We really need to invest in better systems. So it was a bit tricky as to how we wanted to present it, because of course, we're not saying that palm oil is great and everyone should be buying palm oil. And we kind of want to just show that ultimately it's how it's being presented, and it doesn't really matter whether it's in everything or not. We should really be looking at all of our products and where they come from and how they're produced, and making sure that that is done to the highest standard possible, regardless of what the oil is.
I mean, that goes back to the report that I think the report that you referenced earlier, the previous report, Future of Vegetable Oils and Fats. Is that the one from last year? Yeah, we spoke to a relative of yours about that report on the podcast last year, which you can find the episode back there. We'll also put the link back to that report in the show notes. But yeah, talking about reports, so tell us more about the new report.
So essentially, the foundation of it is really quite a simple study. We didn't really actually intend for it to go anywhere. It was more just something fun to do, just to check, saying that we all use this number so frequently. Why don't we check if it's still relevant? And so initially we selected one supermarket which had very clear ingredients lists. That was one of the things. So we were doing them all online. So just looking at online supermarkets that had physical shops and were kind of big supermarkets within the countries that they were based. So the first one we chose was in the Netherlands, just a generic supermarket. And we took 1,000 random products. We sort of put them into different categories. So we made sure that it wasn't skewed for specific categories. We did exclude fruits and vegetables that hadn't been processed, or just raw products, just knowing that they wouldn't contain oils anyway. And then when we did the first analysis from the supermarket, we realized that the numbers were well below 50% for palm oil. And more importantly, the percentages for other oils were far higher. But we never hear about things like this. We never hear about, well, you don't hear as frequently claims about how much soy or how much sunflower oil or maize was quite big in some countries. You don't really hear about those as being like big claims, which kind of made us think like, okay, what is it in other countries? So we took some samples from Australia, the UK. We did one supermarket in the United States, but then we decided to omit it at the end because when we got to the toiletries, which is where the majority of the oleochemicals come in, which is also where you hear a lot about palm oil being in soaps and everything like that. And it was where we saw the biggest increase in oil presence within products. And the supermarket in the United States just failed to have any ingredients lists for any of the toiletries. So considering how big of a contribution these had to total oils within supermarket products, we decided to just take that one out. But once we did some complicated statistical modeling on it, which I didn't totally understand, we left that to the statistician. It came out that from just looking at the raw data, palm oil was in about 10% of supermarket products, excluding those that would just not have oils in them anyway. When we then considered oleochemicals, and because there was quite a lot of uncertainty about the origin of certain oleochemicals, and we looked into it, and it can really depend on supply chains. If there's a lot of palm at one point, then that oleochemical will be derived from palm. It could be derived from coconut otherwise, and it was never specified. So we said, let's imagine that in every instance where an oleochemical could be derived from palm oil, that it is. So taking a very sort of overestimate of the presence of palm. And even this wouldn't reach 50%, which really is quite a big thing.
What was the figure there? Do you remember?
We estimated somewhere around 35 to 40%.
So even when you cook the books a bit, to make it the maximum it could possibly be, you can't get to that figure?
No.
No. Okay.
And that's not to say we can't say anything about the validity of the claim in 2006 when it first came to be. We looked at some publicly available data about the production of palm and the usage of palm since 2006, and it has definitely, the use has declined, especially in the countries in which we looked at products. So it could have been that it was in 50% of products in 2006. Looking at the trend lines, it's still unlikely, considering that sort of 10% figure of when you take just what the data we looked at, rather than having this big assumption that all oleochemicals are from palm. But at least from what we could see, and in those countries, it's very unlikely to be 50% now.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating because, yeah, and again, yes, I mean, maybe you just have to nod and say, yes, maybe at the time when WWF did it, maybe they were looking at the UK supermarkets and they weren't looking at, globally. So that could have made a significant difference at that moment in time. And I would just comment for listeners that in the UK, palm oil volumes coming into the UK have remained relatively flat. They do go up and down, but you are within an acceptable region for the volumes. So I would say today it's about 450,000 tons of palm oil comes into the UK. So that could have been one of the reasons. I'd just like to just drill down into the actual different oils that you found were coming out on top, and maybe just to make some comment about which oils were actually quite prevalent compared to palm oil, because palm oil was certainly not, with the figures that I'm looking at in front of me. I've got a sneaky preview of some information here, but what were the oils that came before palm oil, and were you surprised?
It was, I mean, I don't know if I was necessarily surprised, because I've definitely seen these oils just looking at ingredients lists. Like rapeseed was quite big. It's unfortunate that we couldn't include the United States in there, because then you really saw that soy and maize were very high, and we kind of determined it was probably because of the domestic production. But yeah, to see that that palm oil was definitely on the lower end compared to other oils. Obviously, things like olive oil and shea are still lower than palm oil, but these are kind of, you would normally think of these as being products which aren't so, they're not really in a lot of things. If something has shea in it, it will be talking about the fact that it has shea. I think that was less than 5% of products had that. And again, olive oil is usually more for, I would say, more artisanal products if it has olive oil as the oil within it.
Yeah. And when you were looking at categories, did one category stand out against another? So, like used in cakes or pastries, for an example.
Well, I mean, the category, of course, which had the most oils in it were the toiletries. We did exclude oils just in and of themselves, like cooking oils. And it was, I mean, of course, the processed foods. So any of these ready-made, ready meals, those sort of things, they had a lot of vegetable oils and a lot of different kinds of vegetable oils. So in those, you would see vegetable oils in brackets, 5 different kinds. And so here was also, it was a bit unclear because it, again, wouldn't show the percentage of each of them. So it was hard to kind of determine the exact makeup within them.
Yeah, and I guess just to say, maybe ask the question first. I know that it's law in Europe that you have to declare what type of oil is in a product. Is that the case in the US and Australia?
So it was in both countries. In the US, it wasn't for the toiletries, which is why we ran into that issue. But when we were looking for supermarkets, we had really wanted to have some data from South America or Southeast Asia, and none of these supermarkets had any information. I'm sure if you saw the physical product, if you're in the supermarket, it's likely they would have an ingredients label. But I looked into it, and in most of those countries, they did not have laws which said that they had to specify oils or ingredients. So this was a bit of a limitation, and I think it would have been really interesting to see how it is in other parts of the world, because this is quite a Western view. And I also wonder, even though the supermarkets we looked at didn't say that they were avoiding palm oil, I know there's supermarkets like Iceland which have said they aren't going to have palm oil in their products. The supermarkets we looked at, they stated that they wanted to promote RSPO certified palm, but they didn't say that they were avoiding it. But I do know that in these countries there has been quite a shift away from palm oil in the general market. People they aren't so inclined to buy products which have palm oil in them.
It's got bad PR. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's interesting about the oleochemicals, and maybe we just pick up on that, is that again, in my experience, oleochemicals, it's palm, it's coconut, it's potentially, I always pronounce it she, but there's lots of different pronunciations, and things like palm, stearin. There aren't that many oils that can be used within oleochemicals just because of the chemical profile, and as you've alluded to, it's not always easy to understand what's in the ingredient, because there isn't a legal requirement to name the oil that you use. So that is massive. But just the sheer fact that, I mean, and soya is also used. I've missed out soya there, but what's your thoughts about oleochemicals then? Do you think that globally there's a high percentage of palm oil in oleochemicals, home care and cosmetics, etc.?
I mean, I do think so. And like you said, and one of the main draws of palm oil is that it is such a good oil in these products in terms of how it holds things together and the consistency it has. So it has a lot of desirable kind of factors. And I imagine that it is in a lot of oleochemicals that are used in common products globally. But I think what we're trying to say with this paper is that, okay, maybe it is. We're not trying to say that this fact is wrong, and we're not trying to say that the original claim is bad. What we're trying to point out is that really we should be able to know if if someone produces something using an oleochemical, it should say this is made from palm or this is made from coconut in these percentages. People should be able to know that. And if they do want to avoid palm, that's completely fine. People should be able to make that decision on their own and know where their palm is coming from, to the same extent that they should know where their coconut is coming from and the production conditions there. And we sort of conclude by saying that by sticking a no palm oil label on the front of a product, it's sort of an easy way out for people, and people aren't really wanting to question where any other element of the product is coming from, because it's just okay, well, I've done something good because everyone tells me that palm oil is really bad and it's in everything. So if I choose something that doesn't have palm oil, then I'm doing something good. And it could be true, but it's not necessarily always accurate.
Well, we wouldn't know, as you say. That's the point, isn't it? I mean, one of the questions I think that people who avoid palm oil or any other ingredient should be asking, okay, so what am I using instead? And as this report kind of states, and your previous report is, that's not possible with a huge number of different commodities and ingredients, so you don't know.
Yeah. What we're saying is that if you're not choosing palm oil, you are choosing something else, which still has to be produced somewhere and will have environmental and socio-economic impacts. Depending on the scale, I mean, there is bad palm oil. There's also palm oil that's produced well, but equally that can be the same in other places. And it's not just oils. I think by having these very big claims that sort of turn into a whole sort of narrative and sort of demonization of a single product can make people a bit lazy in terms of wanting to question the origin of their products and really making sure that their choices are in line with their viewpoints and their ethical standards.
You had in your previous report, there was a really good phrase which I've stolen multiple times, which is, there's no such thing as a bad oil crop, there's just bad practices. I think more people should think of things in those terms, but it's very difficult to.
Yeah. I mean, what were the key top oils above palm oil usage and I just would stress is that I know that you've only done 3 cores supermarkets globally, so we're not suggesting for that, oh, this is completely comprehensive, but I really just think it's quite fascinating looking at these 3. But what were the main oils that came on top above palm oil?
So the top 3 were maize, rapeseed, and soya. We also had unspecified. So that came up in about 10% of products that we looked at, and that was just when it would very vaguely say vegetable oils. In most cases, when it said vegetable oils, it would specify. In the Netherlands, I'm not sure whether there were stricter laws on this, but in the Netherlands, it was quite good at saying what the components of that vegetable oil kind of group was. In other countries, in Australia, it was there were higher instances of unspecified oils. And then after that, it was sunflower. Palm comes as number 5 in our list. And these are just ones that we pulled out from looking at ingredients lists. If things didn't come up in an ingredient list in any of the supermarkets, we didn't mark the oil down. So it was just, we sort of looked at, from our first point of data collection, what were the oils that came up there, and then selected whether it was present or not. Very simply, I mean, none of them showed the percentages, so it was just a yes or no. Once we went into other countries, there were some oils that came up that hadn't been in other ones, but again, these were in very low levels.
Yeah, I think I'm amazed by maize. because I wouldn't have put that. If you'd have asked me without looking at this, I would just wouldn't have put maize up there. And you could argue again that we can see that, say, Sainsbury's in particular. Am I allowed to say Sainsbury's? But anyway, one of the supermarkets comes up with that is based in the UK is showing maize as number one, and you would never think of it been like that. I also, just to support the report and just to repeat, the report is about a tick to say an oil is present. There's no way that this is linked to volumes, because that is something that no one can do without some huge input from the rest of the industry. So we know that palm oil itself is, as a crop, outstrips all of the other oils in terms of volumes. But when you're actually looking at the frequency within a product, I'm shocked that maize is there and rapeseed. And I guess then, from a deforestation point of view, maize could be considered within that, and also soya. So again, it really challenges people's thinking, because I don't know what your views are, particularly in the other reports that you've worked at, that anyone particularly picks maize out as being a crop that could cause deforestation.
No, and I do wonder whether palm oil is such a big thing in the media because it is very much tropical deforestation, which I guess soy could be in some instances. Um, but I have heard people talking about, I don't know, rapeseed oil production, and they say, well, it's in Europe, it's not destroying any tropical rainforests, and therefore it's not really deforestation. It's like, well, it is still land use change, it's still monoculture, it's still, you're impacting the environment in some way. And I do think that sort of the visual of these huge ancient trees being burned or cut down, and the poor orangutans who have now lost their habitat is a big
There's a reason why they use orangutans and tropical animals in all of the charities and NGOs have the symbols.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're very evocative.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of insect life is lost, but I don't think that's such a great image, and people aren't going to care as much. I mean, it is a really good marketing tool, and to a certain extent, I mean, palm oil, when produced badly, is really bad. So there is some element of which it has been effective, and potentially it could be, I mean, the WWF could say this is a win from this paper, and saying, well, look, it was so high about 20 years ago, and look at how much it's reduced, and look at what we've done. And probably the marketing and the demonization of it has had a huge impact. But whether we should still be referring to an outdated claim is another thing.
No, and I think that is a really important point. That's why I'm really excited by the work you've done, because I don't think we should look at it. And I also would just suggest that it isn't something that we should celebrate, because I think the fact that when you look at the overall volumes, like we've already talked about, palm oil is on the increase, and often forests have been taken for obviously the timber first, and then rubber plantations put there, and then palm oil plantations, and we don't even go to talking about mining and the destruction of the land and the pollution of the land, and the fact that we want to get these minerals out of through mining, so that we can drive battery driven cars. And so I think it's this whole thing about to try to be holistic, and I think that's what I feel very passionate about. This is, it's really just saying, hey, this is something we should consider. It's more than just one oil. So I just think it just looks great. So, I mean, how far off are you actually publishing this, and what are the bits that you would like to do further work on?
I hope that it would be published within the next month. We do have our data available online, as well as the preprint. I think there could be a lot of interesting research coming out of this. This is very much a foundational study. I think a lot could be done in terms of consumer perceptions, and also hopefully it could be used in a way, if it were to get enough traction and through different studies, to sort of inform policy. Because it's one thing to say, oh, people don't care and they don't want to know what's in their products and they just want to choose the easy option. But how are people to make the right decisions if the information is just not made available to them? And that needs to be, we need to demand that supply chains are more transparent and that producers are seeing where their products come from and how they're produced, and people are entitled to have that information.
Yeah. I guess adding to the idea of information clarity and truth, I think I'd like to hear, this isn't me calling out the WWF, but I'd like to hear from the WWF about where that stat came from, if indeed it was them. But I think it talks to a broader issue in sustainability about, we're very happy to repeat these claims when they back up the prevailing narratives that we've got. And I've been just as guilty of that as anyone else. But actually, we really need to investigate them, because I'm not a great believer in the idea that, the ends justify the means. If you're lying about something, or you're misquoting, or you're using misinformation to drive your ends, I think that's a very dangerous route, and something which can undermine trust in a lot of other things. It has impacts beyond that initial claim. It undermines the truths of the reasons behind a lot of the deforestation, and I think it's a negative for the sustainability movement as a whole.
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess you're talking about informing policy. Again, I think that is a really important point, because the EUDR obviously focuses on 7 commodities. We can't get away with the podcast without mentioning the EUDR. I think that's just, we're almost
Did the EUDR drinking game along this podcast?
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting. Again, I don't think we should just say, oh, it's all about maize, because that's not fair. But if you were just been really, look, this research shows that maize is up there, and yet maize is not featured in the EUDR, nor is it looking like, if there was a second round of commodities to be added, maize wouldn't be added. So, that's where I think this is at least challenging. Is that what you would think, Emily?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think many people think of maize as being a big product. I definitely didn't think it would be such a big component of supermarket products. So yeah, maybe if further research were done into it, it could sort of change these policies and these systems around it to consider other products which people might not actually think are as prevalent as they really are, which could have some quite interesting implications. And I don't know how that would work in terms of how people would build a narrative around these different oils, and how that would maybe change supply chains and market for different products.
You don't think we're going to see calls for a maize boycott anytime soon, though?
No, because that's where it's, it's, it just doesn't have the same connotations. And you're going back to the orangutan, and certainly, we mustn't say that, we're not even implying, it's so important, the habitat for the orangutan, and it's devastating and heartbreaking what's happened to this species. But it's also important to just flag up, just do not continually blame palm oil as if, oh, we get rid of palm oil, it resolve all of the issues. That is definitely not, and never going to be the case. And to to be challenging things holistically, I think is what I, as I've said, just what I see as exciting. I mean, how long did this research take you to do? Or was it?
Well, just for those 3 supermarkets, it took about 5 months.
Wow.
So it's
Right.
manual work.
Yeah.
Looking at a lot of products. We did around 2,000 products, which we had to randomly select from a much larger sample size.
That's quite good. And then obviously it's all things that you can see online. So it's those that publish products with ingredients lists online is the only way that you could do that.
Yes, I think it would be really quite interesting if we could get like a larger group of people to continue the research and maybe go to supermarkets in these countries that we had wanted to look at, like Brazil, for example, and actually go to the supermarkets and find products and look at their ingredients labels, because it's it was slightly disappointing to not be able to look at these just because they didn't have the product information online. Because I mean, the WWF claim doesn't say where that data comes from, so we can't say that we have done something totally different or the same. It's unclear. I'm not sure whether the initial claim even says globally or just supermarket products. Um, but I think it'd be really interesting to see whether it's different, because, like you said, palm oil production is increasing. So if it was 50% and now we're finding it to be about 10%, where is all that other palm oil going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where is it going? And yeah, that's maybe a question to the audience of where is it going? And if you are a supermarket that's listening in, would you be prepared to take part in this study? Because the one thing that they do have is they will know exactly where palm oil is in their ingredients list, rather than, visiting websites. It would be great to do an analysis. So, and we do know we have some listeners from the European supermarkets. So bit of a challenge back to them, see if they would take part.
Mm. So moving forward, kind of before we sort of wrap this up, what are the big take homes then to kind of to conclude?
Um, so our main takeaways from it, first of all, was that ultimately ingredient information is lacking, whether that be supermarkets that don't publicize their ingredients lists, or those that have what we categorize as unspecified oils. There's just not enough information for consumers to make informed choices. And not only does this link to what's listed on an ingredients list, but also you can't really see the origin of those products, whether I mean, it could be certified palm oil, but for the other ones, I mean, there's not, as far as I know, aren't really any major sustainable maize production certification standards. Um, and then, of course, the second major takeaway is that, at least from what we could see and in the supermarkets that we looked at, palm oil is in far fewer than 50% of the products, even at uh, even when we take really a big overestimate, it still doesn't reach 50%. And we're just wondering and questioning whether it's still relevant to be citing this, whether it be for positive or negative use.
Well, I certainly won't be using it again. I'll be using your 10% figure, I think, for now, with a big question mark and maybe an asterisk around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I suppose, what next for you then? What are you going to obviously get this report out, and will you look to do more?
I think I mean, it would be amazing if we could get, like I said, like a bigger community of researchers, because I feel like it could really go far. I mean, the interest that we got even from the preprint from a lot of, um, I mean, palm oil producers and sustainability boards, considering that it hasn't even been published yet, I think it could really be quite exciting. And it was quite interesting to see how many people said, I've been questioning this 50% claim for years now and wondering why we still use it. So hopefully, if anything, it will reduce the amount of times that people want to refer to this claim. And maybe from there, we could sort of look at the other oils and sort of how they're presented and ultimately how they're produced.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. And where can people read, if there's data already up there, where can people get hold of that? Where can people read the preprint?
Yeah, we have a link to it's just an open access database. And I can send the link to the preprint as well.
We'll put all of the relevant links, so you can find all the information on this. We'll put them all in the show notes. So if you want to find out more about the good work that's been done, yeah, please do. And yeah, thank you very much for coming in and sharing this with us. I know it's something that we were, as palm oil people, very, very excited about. And thank you very much to everyone for listening to this edition of the Sustainable Commodities Podcast. Join us next time.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me. This is a great discussion. Thank you.